Well, while a couple of more people are coming on, let me start with some introductions and some logistical information for everybody. First, my name is Brian Feely. I head up marketing for Corporate Synergies and Foundation Risk Partners, and I'm really pleased to be able to help facilitate a discussion today. You're not going to see a lot of PowerPoint slides. You're not going to see any PowerPoint slides. We thought that, what would be best is we have a conversation about GLP-1s and the crossroads that we're at with it and where things are going. And in order to really have a good understanding from all sides, we're fortunate to have with us two folks that have been presenting a lot on RX lately, and of course GLP-1s. And with that, Tim Sullivan, he is the vice president of both network and pricing for Performex. He's also a pharmacist, and his insight is really valuable. Tim has presented with us before. He is a thought leader in this space, and some of our forums that we've held, Tim was kind enough to come out and really field a lot of questions from folks and try to answer as much as we possibly could, given where we were at that time, and things continue to change. So Tim's going to be adding his insight. And John Crable with Corporate Synergies. John is our senior vice president and a benefit consultant on major and national accounts, senior advisor to so many really top name clients that, and some of you are on this call, so and really has a passion for understanding all things related to benefits. But I love the conversations that we have related to RX and where things are going with it. And John has kind of almost found himself a little bit of a niche in that space in terms of his understanding of it. So I'm really happy that John's able to join us. And I lend nothing more than just simply helping to facilitate this conversation. So I hope I do a good job of that. But you all are the ones that'll really help us to drive it as well. Uh, in the chat, I'll keep the chat open. And as you have questions, go ahead and message the group. Sometimes questions are answered by the group, but we'll keep an eye on it and we'll see if we're at a point where maybe we should just veer off and answer that question that's posted in chat and see where things go. At the end of the seminar today, we will make sure that we calculate everything, put it into our system for credits to be offered. There is a one credit for HRCI and SHRM that you receive today as a result of staying with this webinar. So with that, let's get started. Let's talk about GLP-1s. Of course, there's so many different areas to really concentrate on. A lot of it focuses around accessibility and affordability, right? But we'll get into other areas as well, like what's on the horizon, what's new, what are the indications, what are the socioeconomic, ethical implications of these things. There's good use, there's misuse, so much to cover with that. But let's get back to where most of the questions are, and I'm going to ask Tim, maybe from your perspective, and we'll go to John. But in terms of overall accessibility of GLP-1s, maybe give us a little bit of a landscape of where we are today, because this came out of not nowhere. We've seen this before, but all of a sudden everybody's on Ozempic and Wegovy, and you're hearing all these questions surrounding this thing. Where are we with it today?
Yeah, and Brian, I think there's a lot of tentacles in that. Sounds like kind of a simple sort of bit of commentary there. Really, the biggest thing was once, from my perspective, right, from a clinical perspective, is once we started seeing traction on approval of the indication for obesity and weight loss, that obviously was the first step to open the door. What really often gets lost in that discussion, though, and John can certainly jump in from his perspective, but from a clinical perspective, one thing that often gets lost, and it's a really important takeaway, but maybe one of the better takeaways here for a group that just thinks about weight loss, these drugs are extremely effective in treating diabetes. So effective that as of the last 18 months, the American Diabetes Association and other really influential provider and doctor groups have come out to approve it as first-line treatment. So setting aside the cost, that's still obviously there. a lot of the rise that we've seen over the last 2 years is certainly the diabetes coverage indication, but also the fact that all of the large national diabetes associations have approved this drug as first line treatment. It's just that effective at controlling the disease. So I think it's a kind of an interesting point when I think about accessibility, that's one of the items that comes to mind.
It seems, when we were talking at one of our forums, uh, we couldn't help but mention the fact that you see advertisements nonstop on TV about GLP-1s, and they all end up with ask your doctor. And you're talking about the indication where it has amazing effects, and yet you also hear about it being used for various other types of whether they be the original indications or maybe future coming down the line. But what's your stance on that?
Yeah, and I think there's a whole sort of other end from an accessibility standpoint, from a benefit perspective. I know John's got some great perspective there, but just clinically, I always tell people, big takeaway. Remember that at its core, these drugs are effective for diabetes, which is still an enormous category. It is not shrinking; it's growing. Obesity is what we all hear about, but there's really two big categories that are coming down that the FDA will likely approve indications for this year into early next year. One is diabetes paired with heart failure and diabetes paired with peripheral arterial disease. So just to kind of trim that down, it's diabetes plus a cardiovascular indication that is going to open it up further to a group of people who can benefit from it clinically. And then there's disease states called MASH and NASH. Really simple. They're fatty liver disease. The drug has shown tremendous impact there. Clinical trials are over. We'll probably see approval for fatty liver disease this year or early next year as well. And those are two categories. So cardiovascular disease and fatty liver disease, again, the patient population is quite large. Those on the low end of uptake in those categories, I would expect for a employer group today that's already got coverage for the product and intends to continue to expand coverage as new indications comes out, you're likely going to see upwards of a 25% uptake in utilization on top of what you're seeing today if you already have it approved for diabetes and weight loss. So that and now the next one though that's way further on the horizon is Alzheimer's. That one there's promise that is not coming soon, and there's no true sense of when that would happen, but they're all of, Novo and Lilly, the entities that produce these products, are already studying it for Alzheimer's disease. So I think, we've got immediate impact that's coming, but the future, there's going to continue to be indications coming out for the product.
So, John, from your perspective, we have a lot of employers on the line, right? So, we talked about coverage, whether it's currently covered, you continue to cover it, and of course, affordability. What is your perspective on that, working with clients, making these kinds of decisions or looking to make decisions on what to do?
Yeah, so Brian, interesting. I would say that GLP-1s are pretty much covered by all plans as it relates to diabetes, which is what Tim was talking about, right? Because it's such an effective drug and it's a frontline drug as of a couple of years ago. So really, we started to see the escalation in cost and uptake on utilization when it became a frontline drug where you didn't have to try metformin or one of the other drugs for diabetes first. So really the cost increase has been pretty notable. And then when the weight loss component came about and Oprah and other stars and celebs started talking about, how amazing it was for weight loss, that's when clients face the challenge of, well, I cover it for diabetes already. Should I now be covering it for weight loss? And it's a tug of war that all of our clients are dealing with internally. I think if there wasn't a cost component, I believe every client that I work with at least would absolutely cover it because they understand the impact of reducing obesity, that will help with MSK claims, it will help reduce the incidence of diabetes in the future. There's so many things that it will assist prophylactically, and curb in the future. The challenge is that they're so expensive, and clients are already seeing the huge financial impact on just the diabetes component. It's one of the top cost drivers in a lot of clients' claims. And then to add the weight loss component, I'll just share a quick stat. From what we've seen across our book of business, and we work with a data analytics platform that has about 7.5 million member lives in the data. And the data suggests that if you add the weight loss component to the existing diabetes component, that it increases your pharmacy spend on average 10%, which would really be 2 to 3% of your total healthcare dollars. So just to add the weight loss component, think of whatever your premiums are today, whether you're fully insured or self-funded, and add 2 to 3% just to account for adding the weight loss component.
Amazing. Now, Deborah has a question for us on it. We're talking about the amazing impact that these GLP-1s are having with the indications, diabetes and what have you. And what about the safety of it? What can we say from a safety standpoint? And Tim, maybe that's your
Yeah.
arena.
And maybe notable too, I think for the sake of the audience, John and I talk about this stuff all the time. So please fire off questions. Brian is going to do a great job of pausing us throughout. You're not interrupting. It adds so much more value when we hear from you guys. So please, and I think John agrees with this. If we're the two smartest guys in the room, then we usually have a big problem. So no questions too dumb or too smart. Please don't feel hindered there. So there's really a tight answer to that. So are they safe? The answer is yes. Unfortunately, the dosing and the strength for the products used specifically for weight loss are different than for diabetes. So unfortunately, we don't have a long enough horizon on use at that strength and at those doses for weight loss to really firmly say, is there going to be some long-term, 10 years from now, we're going to be looking back and saying, wow, XYZ thing happened. But what we can say is we're decades into these products being on the market specifically for diabetes, and they have been extremely safe, well tolerated. We can get into some of the side effects that kind of come into play at the higher doses, but I would generally say, as a clinician, I have no problem recommending these products. I also make sure people know the side effects are interesting. They're not going to kill you, not to be, too blunt on it, but the side effects, the gastrointestinal side effects in terms of nausea, GI upset, those things are real. Lots of people experience them on these drugs. But in terms of just overall safety, the safety profile is pretty strong right now, and the medical community agrees with that.
And does that extend to the other uses, like for just weight loss specifically? Like, is there a correlation between it is safe and effective? It may have side effects, but if you fall into the category of, diabetes and what have you, it far outweighs the risk. But then let's say you move out of that and you're just talking from the standpoint of weight loss. So, and if second to that, that's the first part of it. And then second to that, if it is so, and more people, once that's an indication, more and more people are going to jump on the bandwagon and start taking this. I think you had mentioned, that's going to be an uptick in the utilization for your plans. So two parts there.
I'll let just on the safety thing quick, and then I'll let John jump in as well. But I think I wish it was more complicated than this. The reality is we don't have enough of a runway on the use of these products specific for weight loss to sort of put a nail in the coffin on safe. But we have decades of use of these products with tremendous a tremendous safety profile. That doesn't mean people don't have side effects. I'm talking about actual medical risk to you. It's quite low. But the one piece that I think it's just that it's a really strong caveat. The doses and the strengths are different for weight loss, and we don't have enough runway to say 20 years from now, I can't guarantee we won't look back and say, boy, that was kind of interesting. Things happened that couldn't be predicted. We're just not quite there yet.
Yeah, and so Brian, I'll add to that. I have clients ask that a lot, so I started doing some research, and I came across two. Again, to Tim's point, relatively shorter term research on the weight loss component, and both research studies showed very minimal to no adverse side effects or health risk. They were only 2 to 4 year studies. Interestingly, however, it should be noted that they were funded by Novo and Eli. So the two studies
Yeah.
are in fact funded by the manufacturers of the drugs.
Seen that before,
Yeah.
right?
And
Um,
I'll just add again back to as a clinician, I personally would be shocked that we stack a decade on with use for weight loss. I would be shocked if there is some large unknown adverse event that's going to impact millions of people using these drugs. I think we're going to persist to see a relatively strong safety profile on these drugs. But I also want to caution that's different than a side effect, right? A lot of people that use these drugs experience nausea, diarrhea, upset stomach, so bad that they stop taking it. But it isn't an adverse event. It's not adversely impacting their health per se. It's just a side effect that makes it difficult
two
to
different things.
persist on the drug. Yes.
Gotcha. Let's talk a little bit about the affordability. Just bounce back to that part a second. Um, so some of the questions coming in, all right, great. We like that they're very effective. We like that it may reduce the long-term impact to those that aren't taking care of themselves and they are obese and they have all of these other issues. But with the costs associated with it, what, John, are you seeing in the way of employers trying to curb the cost? What caps or, what are some of the strategies or levers that they're pulling in order to keep costs down?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I get asked that a lot. I've read some articles where some large employers are saying, okay, we're going to cap this at $30,000 of a lifetime spend. As we know, a lot of these drugs, even on the obesity side, can be lifestyle drugs, meaning that you are not lifestyles, excuse me, lifelong drugs, meaning that unless you significantly can change your lifestyle or the drug itself helps you change your lifestyle, that you could be taking them for the rest of your life. So putting a lifetime cap seems counterintuitive. You've helped someone achieve a health goal, and now all of a sudden you take away the very, you know, support mechanism that allowed them to achieve that health goal. What we see a lot of clients doing that do, and by the way, I want to also be clear, more than 50% of employers do not cover GLP-1 for weight loss. Only about 42, last study I saw, only about 42% of employers are covering for weight loss. That's up about 2% over the last year and a half, but it's still less than half of employers cover it. The ones that do cover it are usually tying it to a lifestyle management requirement. So they have to be working with a primary care doctor. They have to be working with nutrition counseling or engaged in other wellness program and activity. I don't want to go down the hole of being very specific, but generally that's what you're going to see. And those programs are usually more effective at both managing the cost because they're preparing people properly for potential side effects, as Tim talked about. They're preparing people for, you need to do more than just take the medication. We need to help with a lifestyle change. And remember that for some people, taking the drug allows them to change their lifestyle. If they're able to lose weight and they weren't able to effectively exercise previously, even go on walks, they cut 20, 30, some cases 80 or more pounds, all of a sudden they can do things they were never able to do before. So you want the program to help encourage that lifestyle change. Those are the most effective. I'm not aware of any client that is currently giving open access to the drugs.
So when that happens, because I'm cheating. I'm looking over at some of these questions coming in, and this is what's great about having this as a discussion, right? So in that scenario, are you seeing any folks put in place where, okay, now they're in the proper BMI range? Is that one of the things where hey, we will authorize this, we will cover this up to the point at which you are no longer considered obese.
Yeah, yeah, and again, that goes back to being similar to having that lifetime cap. The difference is they may qualify again to go back into the program. So what I've seen some clients do, or some health plans for that matter, is um, raise the BMI level to qualify. That's a pretty common one, so that they're not just catching people that need to cut 20 pounds. They're catching people that really need to drop weight, to have a healthier lifestyle. Not that 20 pounds isn't important, but you know my point. And then some do have the BMI kind of corridor. So if you fall
Mhm.
below, yes, we're going to take you off of this. However, we're going to continue to support your healthcare journey by keeping you with working with a nutrition counselor, working with your primary care provider. The idea here is to keep them on the health track.
Right. Um, Interesting. So the people who do come off it, and let's say they don't have the nutritionist and that level of support, is it still true that a lot of them rebound back quickly, unfortunately, that it's kind of a lifelong commitment to these types of drugs? Tim?
Yeah, and I can, and some of this is even just a follow on what John was hitting on at the end of his, last set of commentary. I'll peel it back a bit and then answer your question. It's sort of a two birds, one stone scenario. If you get on a GLP-1 for weight loss and you don't change your diet, you're going to fall into the group of people who can't actually tolerate the drug. So what happens is if you don't change your diet, you continue to eat the same amounts and the same types of food, what will happen is you're almost certainly going to bump up against the GI side effects. And they're pretty, they're severe enough generally where people will lose motivation to stay on the drug. So to succeed on the drug, you generally have to change your lifestyle, particularly from a diet perspective. Um, when you go off the drug, the only way you'll ever succeed is if you've already changed your diet. If you're on one of these drugs and then you just go off of them cold turkey, you almost certainly will gain all of your weight back. That's just how it's going to work. You haven't changed your lifestyle, you haven't changed your diet. All you did was take these drugs. They reduced your mental desire to eat food. They've reduced physically your desire to eat food. So you do lose the weight. But if you just cut off these drugs cold turkey and you haven't made a lifestyle change, it's highly likely you're going to gain that weight back.
Okay. And I just want a point of clarification. Ray posted here. Did he hear correctly, John, that you're not aware of any client that has open access to GLP-1s without any other health support journey partners?
Yeah, I'm talking specifically about my clients. That's correct. None of my clients include coverage for GLP-1 for weight loss without having other requirements. And that's true of most of the health plans as well. Not all of them, but certainly the Cignas, Uniteds, some of the Blues plans that we work with, they require some level of commitment from the participant.
And then here's a question. How would it work when you have employees who pay for it privately and then want to make a transition to the health insurance covering it? So they had a BMI that was high, and they got down to the lower weight. They still need
Yeah.
it.
I saw Andrea's question. I actually have never heard that one before, but unfortunately, in a scenario like that, that individual is going to look like someone who never struggled from a BNI perspective historically. So if you've been paying for it privately and you join a new employer who has coverage for it through the insurance plan, but you've already achieved your weight loss goal and you're already below that BMI threshold, that provider is almost certainly not going to approve it if they have a BMI threshold as part of their authorization
And
process.
exactly, the BMI threshold is not a goal that I want. Hey, I want to be, 180. It's the BMI that
Yep.
ends up dictating that, right? Okay.
Yep. The one thing just to go back, everything that was discussed was accurate. We are seeing in the most recent, most of the big PBM players, if they're going to make coverage changes, they generally make them mid-year, so June, July, or the beginning of the year. I think everybody here is pretty used to that. We are actually seeing some coverage criteria, so the prior auth criteria shift, where as long as you have a comorbidity, so sleep apnea or cardiovascular disease or diabetes. Um, you can meet your BMI goal And so now you're below the BMI threshold, but you'll be able to get another 12-month off or 6-month off to stay on the product from a maintenance perspective. I will say that's new as of really mid-year this year. There are some national players out there who are allowing you to stay on it even after you meet your BMI goal. But this environment changes so fast, some of them could find that increases utilization or maintains utilization at a plateau that they're not comfortable with. But for the moment, we are actually seeing some shift in that direction, which is interesting.
Interesting. Going back to April when we had our forums and we were talking about all of this, there was a lot of questions related to um, the supply shortages and how were they going to keep up and what have you, and then even still the supplies changed. The people who were getting the actual GLP-1s, some were getting compounding, and how has that changed any? Because that was around the same time that the laws were going into effect to prohibit compounding, and of course, that was there because they assumed there was going to be a big shortage, right? But now there's no longer a shortage, apparently, Lilly, and would say, hey, we got the manufacturing down on this, no problem. Uh, but how has that landscape changed?
Yeah, I'll hit it quick, and John, jump in. Obviously, the again, like a real tight soundbite. Like everybody's gonna leave with hopefully a whole bunch of things from us. The only reason that the Hims and Hers and the Row.com and all of these online pharmacies were able to produce compounded versions of these products was because there was an FDA emergency on shortage.
Right.
The FDA pulled that, so all of 2025, that emergency's been gone, and these entities can no longer produce the compounded version. I don't know if we want to get too derailed by some of the little loopholes. Most of them have been closed. There was a period of time where if you had like vitamins and supplements added, which I was not comfortable with from a safety perspective, you can get away with it. But most of those doors have been closed. So there's no longer an FDA emergency from a shortage perspective. And I'll say, from my vantage at a PBM, where we're overseeing, coverage for give or take about 6 million lives, we're months away from having any shortage concerns. So I will say that landscape, I think, has picked itself up in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brian, to add to that conversation, when those compounds were available, they were typically, I saw them as low as 200. I'm not sure I would have trusted those. Those are the ones that seem to say that they had, vitamin C added or something. But the compounds were often the 300 to 500 range. As of earlier this week, if people followed the news, GoodRx signed a deal with Novo Nordisk, which is the manufacturer of Ozempic and Wegovy, and now patients can go directly onto GoodRx and buy the drug at a local pharmacy for weight loss for $499, and they're getting the actual brand name drug. Now, what will frustrate the employers on this webinar is that same drug is going to cost you and your health plan anywhere from $1,400 to $1,600, and then you're going to get somewhat of a rebate. You're still going to pay anywhere from $900 to $1,100 for that drug, and people can go to GoodRx and buy it directly from the pharmacy for $500.
Mm. But by the way, there was a question earlier about CVS Caremark and not offering Zepbound, and now you hear this
Yeah.
these contracts. So what's the correlation?
Yeah, follow dollar. That's, I always say pharmacy isn't actually that complicated if you just follow the money. So they just preferred from a rebate perspective Wegovy. So for them, they saw an opportunity to create competition between Novo and Lilly, and they ultimately made a coverage choice to eliminate Zepbound. I will say they still have access to Zepbound. Some of their self-funded plans are still going to have access to it. But they created a scenario where they were able to maximize rebate potential by preferring a product in the category. They're certainly not the only entity that's made moves like that.
I want to get back. Ray has another question, and part of this may have been answered, but I just want to go back to it to make sure that we fully answered it. He wants to know, can we comment on the challenge employers face that currently cover GLP-1s in some fashion, but look to add further hurdles or requirements that the PBM see as potentially disrupting the volume, which results in rebates being placed at risk, resulting in cost-saving decisions becoming a cost increase. So what's the employer to do other than just not support it, not cover it?
Yeah, so I'll touch on from the consulting side first, and then Tim can jump in. That is really quite frustrating. And I'll take it a step further. If you currently do not, let's say your plan is self-funded. If you do not currently cover GLP-1 for weight loss, that's fine. If you add GLP-1 for weight loss, but want to make it more restrictive than the PBM's go-to-market strategy, then they ding your rebates for a bunch of other drugs in addition to the GLP-1 for
Yep.
weight loss. So it ends up costing you exponentially even more than adding the GLP-1 for weight loss. So unfortunately, that's where at times you get caught if you're working with one of the big three PBMs. And I don't want to disparage any of the PBMs. They all have a place, but if you're going to work with CVS, Caremark, Express Scripts, or Optum, you're going to have to follow their protocols and strategies. They're just not going to give you the flexibility of the second tier PBMs, whether it's a Welldyne or Livinity or Maxor, or there's a Scout RX. There's a bunch of other PBMs available that give you a lot more flexibility and creativity. What you're giving up, though, is the pricing, across the entire spectrum of drugs. You're overall going to get better pricing typically from the big three PBMs. So you have to weigh that pricing disadvantage to move to a smaller PBM with the advantages you may gain from your ability to manage the formulary more to your liking and frankly, more strictly.
Yeah, and
Tim,
I'll just
anything to add?
Yeah, just to add quick, as I work at Performer X, we are a mid-tier PBM. So our approach is we're 100% pass through. So we only touch the rebate dollars fast enough to give them to our clients. So for us, we like John couldn't have said it more perfect, right? So we try to create a landscape where there is flexibility, but I've worked at the most of the bigger PBMs, and John nailed it on the head. It seems frustrating, but when you tear down from a net cost perspective, what feels like inflexibility, if you're at one of the larger PBMs, you're probably net even or at a pretty advantaged place from a net price perspective. So again, there's good with the bad there. And it's hard to say that there's like a one size fits all, but I will say, and this is maybe too blunt, if you're self-funded and you are currently not covering for weight loss, at least, my recommendation would be to continue to not cover for weight loss and come up with some other program or approach to potentially fund access or encouragement for off-benefit solutions, because the web is so tight around how closely coverage of these drugs is tied to everything else Novo and Lilly produce, and they've got a lot more products that you guys are covering that have nothing to do with weight loss.
Interesting question. Have you heard of any employees requesting GLP-1 to be covered under the ADA?
I did have one client who brought that up to us, and obviously we don't give legal advice. They had run it by their inside counsel and said, there's no requirement to cover the drug, at this time. So, but I did hear that from one client.
What about you're not covering it, but you're allowing your employees to utilize their HSA or FSA? How does that work?
Yeah, so I would assume that just like any other drug that you buy through GoodRx, it's a qualified drug that you can use FSA dollars, HSA dollars. I've heard of employers that are considering an HRA arrangement to maybe share costs for patients that want to go out and buy it direct consumer, because again, it's $500 for the 5 milligram, I think it is, through GoodRx.
What about compounds?
So we generally steer clear of compounds. The challenge with compounds, and remember, I'm often working with mid to larger employers. So they're a little more hesitant to do things that they consider a gray area. So the compound, what happens with the compound is, and Tim can give a better view probably. A compound is when you take multiple FDA approved drugs, put them together to create a new drug. That's the compound. According to the FDA, just because you're using FDA approved ingredients to produce the new drug, that does not mean that the new drug is FDA approved. As a matter of fact, compounds generally are not FDA approved drugs.
Yep. Yeah, I mean you said it perfectly, John. So there's no the FDA approved access, but did not necessarily approve the drugs the same way they approve proper drugs. So right now the landscape shifted massively down. There are still some loopholes out there, unique formulations that are sort of getting around the FDA's compound laws. But I fully expect that any viable access to compounds is going to be continue to shrink to zero. What will be left will be products that are not from reputable sources, that are possibly going around regulations in a manner that could be considered not legal. So right now, from where we were 18 months ago to where we are today, the compound market has shrunk. There still is some access, but it's mostly in exception scenarios. And to John's point, those drugs are not FDA approved.
And,
The
and
whole
in,
and
yeah,
I
John.
was going to add just one thing to add. The reason why Lilly and Nova are creating direct programs, whether it's their original direct to consumer or partnering with GoodRx in this case, is they're wanting to basically supplant the compound market. They're more or less coming in at the price points that you could get those compound products at. So if you're paying cash through those direct programs, you're more or less getting them directly from the source, non-compounded, FDA approved, but you're getting it at sort of market rates where the compounds were at.
What about this cost landscape that we're looking at? There's going to be pills available soon, the injections are everything's changing. And at what point then does that change everything, right? And are some of these challenges no longer the type of challenge that the employers are faced now because of the evolution? Because correct me if I'm wrong, we've been through this before with different types of drugs that were first to the market, very expensive. Over time, now here we are, and it's not an issue anymore. Maybe speak to that to give people a sense of timing of what's happening down the pike.
Yeah, so the first oral will be available in 2026. So we're going to have an oral dosage form. There very much will be people who come off the sideline who are candidates for the products today, but just refuse to self-inject. So there's going to be a jump, and there's a lot of research on there on that impact. A lot of good research on the impact that could have. The additional indications are going to create another jump. But the big turn will be when the products go generic. And right now, estimates are that there's enough legal sort of hemming and hawing from the manufacturers that we probably are still, give or take, 3 to 5 years out from the first generic for weight loss. Once that happens, it will no longer be a conversation. We will cease to have this discussion the way we do when blockbusters go generic in any other category. But the difference is between now and then, there's going to be additional indications, oral products. So we aren't at the plateau yet from a utilization standpoint. We're still climbing.
And I see Deborah. So Novo and Lilly will be issuing oral GLP-1s to your point that you just made, right?
Yep. Yes, both of them. And there's other manufacturers that are working strictly on oral products that will not have a self-injectable, will just have an oral. So we're going to find that landscape's going to grow really fast starting in 2026.
I think there's some hope. The generic is the big kind of fall. I don't recall the exact number, 17 or more manufacturers that are working on GLP-1 weight loss medications. I think the hope is that as they come out and there's just more market for them or more opportunities, that will also help drive some price,
Yep.
you know, deflection.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree, John. Market competition will increase. as really 2027 is when I think we'll start seeing relief there. There'll just be more options. What CVS did with Zepbound, that'll just be easier to do. There'll be more options. You'll be able to pick a couple winners from a coverage standpoint and exclude the rest. You're kind of left right now with really only three products approved for weight loss. And those entities, particularly Novo and Lilly, have a really strong sort of moat around all of the other products they have. John nailed it on the head earlier. It's hard to create value when you're sort of up against a manufacturer who's going to pull rebate value from other products unrelated if you make a move on their weight loss drugs. So I think totally agree, John. Once we see the other manufacturers hit, that'll be the first cut, and then when they go generic in 4 or 5 years, that'll be the next opportunity.
There was a question in here about lifestyle accounts. Are you hearing about lifestyle accounts being used for this? And I'm not familiar if that's something, John, you can answer.
I think that kind of goes back to that HRA, and I'm hesitant to answer questions around specific clients strategies and protocols because I don't know all of the factors. But to me, that sounds like what they're referencing are HRA arrangements or FSA that the employer may fund a portion of or reimburse to allow for certain lifestyle medications. Also, things I'm going to holistic, mental health, gym reimbursements, all of that type of stuff.
Getting back to what we were saying about sustainability, right? You're
Yeah.
on this, you get to a certain point, your BMI is in check, and now it's about sustaining, and you're utilizing other measurement or other support types of solutions to keep you there. Uh, where do we go in the next 12 months? And many employers right now are faced with making decisions. We're almost around the corner for the majority of folks that are making enrollment is around the corner. Their plan designs are in flux. They're trying to land on a spot, and this is front and center for them. What kind of advice do you have for those that haven't been able to land on a strategy? What advice would you give them to say, okay, this is your plan of attack. This is what you should do to understand as best you can what your strategy should be.
Yeah, so I'll take that first, Brian. I think again, cost aside, knowing how effective these drugs can be and how beneficial they can be to so many members and patients, I think cost aside, every client would cover GLP-1 for weight loss. They already cover it for diabetes. The challenge is that we are facing. I just read in Benefits Pro yesterday that the editor came out and after talking to the major health plans, the Bucas, Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna, and many big consulting houses and brokers like us or some of our very capable competitors, that we are seeing the highest rate of healthcare inflation in 2026 in over a decade. Now, part of that is GLP-1s for diabetes. Part of it is GLP-1s for weight loss, but it's all the other things as well. It's the COVID catch-up. We're seeing cancer claims at a higher rate. So that was the deferred care and tests. We're seeing health systems that have consolidated. We're seeing private equity that is invested heavily in the healthcare space, whether it's air ambulances, ambulance services in general, urgent care facilities. So private equity has gotten involved. So as a result of all of these pressures, the insurance carriers themselves, their earnings reports for 2025 have not been good at all. They're all under tremendous pressure. They're suffering losses that are beyond what they anticipated. And we can see in our self-funded clients, and I have clients, from as small as 250 to 30, 40,000 employee lives, they're all seeing rates of increase that we have not seen before. So I think adding an expense like a GLP-1 for weight loss really becomes an emotional tug of war, which is what I had talked about, at the onset of this. I still have clients considering it. There was a study released recently that showed that when an employer covers GLP-1 for weight loss, they see other healthcare costs go down. So they see a reduction in other healthcare costs for obese patients that are losing weight as a result of GLP-1. That's positive and that's great to hear. Unfortunately, what they also said is the cost decrease, the cost savings for those patients is not sufficiently offsetting the actual cost of the GLP-1 medication. That's how expensive they are. $12,000 to $18,000 a year. They're seeing healthcare costs go down $7,000 to $8,000. Now, one could argue that over time, you avoid cancer, you avoid MSK surgeries, you avoid cardiac conditions, you avoid type 2 diabetes, that the cost will level out or perhaps be even better. But unfortunately, employers have to meet financial budgets and goals this year, next year, and the year after.
And that kind of tees up something that we all know beyond just GLP-1s. And that is for any employer, the importance of educating their participants on preventive care, making sure that they're doing all of the things that they should be that are typical, but we still know that the majority of people just don't do it. They're not getting the preventive care when they should be getting it. And those, forget GLP-1s a second. If you want to impact your healthcare, your plan, I mean, those are the things that are low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's a reason why even within our own company, our wellness program right now, our emphasis is making sure everybody goes and gets their annual exam and takes care of those things that you're up for, whether it be a colonoscopy, whether it be your mammograms, well, all of those things. So, and this is just another layer on top of all of that. But we're seeing the cost impact, and it's real decisions that I think people are faced with, because of it.
And Brian, I think you bring up a good point. As you know, my team and I are honored to be the broker consultant for our own company. For those not familiar, we have almost 3,000 employees across many states. I sit in on the meetings with the CFO, the COO, the CEO, and the CHRO, and all the benefit people. And we currently are trying to figure out the best path forward to give people access to GLP-1 for weight loss. We recognize the importance, but we also ultimately, have to be able to manage the cost of our health plan, and those, unfortunately, do not always align.
Tim, anything to add on that with your obvious experience here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just additional nuance to everything John said. I think what has gotten, I would say, fairly strong consensus, whether it be benefit experts, CFOs at self-funded plans, clinical experts, is that if you're going to cover GLP-1s, if you're going to dive in and cover them from a weight loss perspective, that you need to have really tight authorization criteria. And John kind of hinted at that, right? BMI threshold, comorbidities. You want to have that be tight. It cannot just be really broad without any additional criteria. And you can, I don't like to say Google it, but you can look up what are the big players doing in this space. They're all doing something very similar to that on their most commonly used formularies. So that's one. But the second piece is the ones that I think are really succeeding where they sort of had to bite the bullet of cost, but what they're succeeding, whether the right people are using it, the right people are staying on it, and they're succeeding, is when you wrap it with a clinical program where you've got some sort of clinical management. I think the best ones, and there's a lot out there, and John and team I know all about most of them and have done a good job of communicating to their clients and some of you guys likely on it, is they actually restrict the prescribing to a certain set of prescribers, often within this sort of encapsulated program. You can't get access unless you participate in the program, which is a certain amount of touch points, weigh-ins, nutrition counseling, and then that tight auth criteria. So there's a bunch of ways to skin the cat on how you would dive into this space, but I would recommend that two-pronged approach of sort of encapsulating a care program around it with really tight authorization criteria.
Hey, Brian, I agree, Tim. That's exactly what we're seeing. Andrea had put in the notes that there could be a good recruiting tool. Interesting you say that, Andrea, because when I'm talking to the HR execs, professionals at my clients, they're saying that they are having candidates ask them, you know, as they're considering employment, do you cover GLP-1s for weight loss? And they said that it's, you know, that there's been very few other drugs where someone has asked that. You know, they've said they've heard things like, hey, you know, do you cover, you know, what's your health plan, cover or not cover? And they may hint around, but I've heard several say that this is actually being asked from recruits in the interview process, which I find interesting. Uh, I know we're going to wrap in a few. We have some good questions still to go, but I will share anecdotally. My sister-in-law is a physician. She is a weight management lifestyle physician at Dartmouth. And she will tell you that GLP-1s for weight loss are life-saving. She will tell you that it changes people's lives, but she is 100% on board that every employer should cover it. And I explained to her the challenges of the financial aspect. And in her world, the ideal world is if everyone covered it, then everyone would be on the same footing from a competitive standpoint, from a cost perspective, and that is a society and especially a country, the US, that unfortunately is battling obesity, would be better served and would ultimately spend significantly less on healthcare in the decades to follow. And I think that overall philosophy, I think, is hard to argue with. It's really just kind of how do we get there and allow employers to also maintain an affordable budget. Brian?
Good point. And there was a question I just wanted to make sure we went back to it. Talking about what is the expected cost of when they go with an oral drug.
Yeah, so again, just think about what you would do, right? You're a multi-billion dollar publicly traded international entity. They're not going to cannibalize themselves. So the oral is going to come out, and pound for pound is going to be pretty much the same cost, at least initially, as the injectable products. And the reason why is because these entities know they've got the pump's primed. There's people sitting on the sideline that want to use a GLP-1 but will never inject. So they don't have to go fishing for their audience on these products. So they will not be launched at an appreciable price discount. At least that's what our pipeline indications are telling us at the moment.
That's what I've heard as well.
But over time, there will be a situation where these pricing strategies, they come down, they normalize a little bit just because of the access and generics coming into play. We covered a lot of information related to GLP-1s, and it's not done. As we always say on any of our webinars or any of our forums, stay tuned. You know, we try to, as best we can, be thought leaders in this space, and whether that's bringing in folks like Tim to speak to it, or writing articles on it. You know, John, you just had a few articles that were written on the entire healthcare, system and chain of events and costs related to that supply chain. We will continue to do that and bring these discussions to you. And I want to say thank you to all of the participants on today's call because you helped drive the conversation. We were wondering, was this going to be something that we should be doing PowerPoint? No, this is the kind of discussion that we want to have, and we'll continue to do it. So thank you all. I think we will go ahead and we will make sure that we get the HRCI and SHRM credits out to everybody. But thank you again. We really appreciate your participation.
Brian, if I could add to that, to Brian's point, we were a little anxious about this format because we're used to doing presentations, and we all said, you know what, we think that we're going to have great client interaction on this, and thank you to everyone submitting questions and also sharing ideas amongst yourselves, which was great. And we're happy that the format worked. And please give us feedback. Let us know how we can do it better and different.
Yeah, take a look at the chat. There's a link to give us feedback. The next day is when everything will process. You'll get an email with a link to get your credit. But by all means, provide us some feedback, and we take that to heart, and that we turn that into actionable thought leadership moving forward. So Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.